Okay, it's loading, so it should be up in a second.
Okay.
Okay, so we are live now.
I can hear you loud and clear now.
Okay, so we are live on Facebook, and this is Fatu Kamara. And once again, welcome to the TAFLA virtual lectures. Last week we were here, actually 2 weeks ago we were here, and we had Dr. Karamo Sonko, and we are here again today with another topic. What I'm going to do is the CEO of South Africa Global and founder will introduce the speaker who we already have here with us. And the topic will be on decision making. And after this, we will take questions from you and also from the students who are already in the class right now, if I can call it a class. But I would like to introduce Mustafa Njai TAF so he can tell you more about the speaker that we have today. Hello, TAF. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Thank you very much, Fatu. Thank you very much, fellows, and those who are listening, wherever you are, from anywhere in the world. I would like to introduce the topic and the speaker. If you remember last week, we had the chairman and CEO of TAF Africa Global, who spoke on the good qualities of leadership. Quite a number of people, got connected, and I think it was very interactive and quite useful. Today, we have Mr. Ousainou Ngum. Mr. Ousainou Ngum is a Gambian international development and finance expert. And he is a chartered accountant with an MBA on change management. He has significant knowledge and experience in transformational change management in private and non-profit organizations. He has published numerous articles and position papers on international finance and international transformation. And is currently actively participating in the international debates on citizen-driven change and aid and development effectiveness. His take on citizens-driven change explores and communicates a perspective of change in societies that stems from citizens' aspirations rather than markets or states, both of which he believes have a role to play. He advocates for locally owned solutions to poverty eradication and social justice beyond aided development, positioning citizens-driven change as a positive alternative methodology in the term social transformation process. Ousainou Ngum is bilingual, both English and French, and currently lives in Banjul. Recently, he was appointed as the chairman of the Gambia International Airlines. So, Mr. Ngum, you're welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jai. Good afternoon to Fatu, who's in the US. Good evening to the rest of your TAFLA leadership team. And good morning to my Southeast Asia colleagues who I know are listening. Hello, everyone. Now, I have been asked to take you through the topic of decision making. And what I wish to do is to have a conversation with you about decision making and the role it can play in transforming both ourselves and our lives. Now, I have done a presentation which I will now share on the screen. Let me share my screen. Just give me a minute to share my screen.
No problem.
Let me just sort that out.
Is it not coming through?
Yep.
So your screen's not here yet.
No, I'm getting that sorted. Is my screen on now?
No, it
I
isn't.
can't see it.
It's not on yet?
No, it isn't. It isn't.
All right, let me share my screen now.
Okay, it's on.
It's on.
Yes.
Yes, it's on now.
Brilliant. All right, so you can see my screen now, yeah?
Yes,
Yes, we can. Yeah.
see it.
All right, now decision making. What I intend to do in this topic today is to really take you through a journey of exploring how decision making can be valuable to us. Now, the way I intend to do that is to present a series of slides, and on each slide, I will have some talking points to explore the particular slide and have a conversation with you. And hopefully by the time we finish the presentation, we will end up in a place where you will feel that there has been value in our conversation. So,
Ousainou, sorry, we've lost your screen, huh?
you've lost my screen?
Yes, we can only see you now.
Let me go back to my screen then. Are you seeing it now?
No, we are not.
Okay. Are you
Okay,
seeing my
it's
screen
back.
now?
Yes, we are seeing it. Yes, yeah.
Brilliant.
Oh, but we keep losing you. I mean, okay, that's it. Yeah, okay. We've seen it now.
All right, so decision making, I will go through it exploring the power of the mind. Basically, what I want to demonstrate by the time we're through is that through exercising our minds, we can transform both ourselves, our lives, and the societies we live in. Now, as humans, we all share the same physiological makeup. In other words, we all have a skeleton, we have cells, we have organs. But as people, we are defined by the decisions we make. Now, what do I mean by that? If you've grown in Gambian society and you've been to school here, you will find that our education system is primarily instructive. You go to school, you're given instructions, you're expected to memorize, take an exam, regurgitate what you've memorized, and pass the exam. But when you move across to the world of change and the world of decision making, the relationships there are much more collaborative than individual. Let me give you the basic example of a child. When you have a young child crawling on the floor, what does he do? Anything he picks up, the first thing he attempts is to put it in their mouth. And as parents, we go around trying to pull it away from them. Now, what that child is doing is they're exploring. They're trying to find out what decisions they make with the different scenarios they get presented with. Now, when you're an adult, for example, and you turn up in a restaurant and you're having a meal, and the only meal you eat whenever you go is steak, everybody accepts that this guy has made a decision that this is what they're having. At that point, you're at your optimum, you're optimizing. Very different from a child who's exploring. Now, the way our education system works, it does not allow us that exploration latitude. Instead, it's very instructive. So what you are told becomes the confine of your thinking. And that's what you're expected to reproduce in an exam. And I will come back later to why I chose that. Because in decision making, what is effective is collaboration. How collaborative are those relationships? Hence my second slide, where I am saying the key to decision making is the ability to communicate your ideas so that they impact others with a positive and forceful energy to move things forward. So basically, when you make a decision, it should be a decision that you're able to communicate and impact people and society so that it's transformative. Now, moving on, decision-making can be as simple as flipping a coin, or just following your heart, or making a choice at random, or a well-reasoned decision through a chosen strategy. Now, that is where I want us to be. Well-reasoned decisions through whatever strategy we choose to arrive at that decision. Now, I will explain that. Most of the times when you make a decision, you're thinking about success and not failure, because you want that decision to succeed. Now, as humans, we're all disposed to contemplate success. That's how we are wired. What I want to do is to take you to a point where when you're thinking about decision, you consider the constraints. What are the constraints that are making me make this decision? And the reason I say that is because I believe when you consider constraints, it allows you to make decisions. Now, I will give you a simple example of what I mean by considering constraints. This example I'm about to give you happened in a US setting, but I will give it using a Gambian setting. If you imagine you're all in a class of entrepreneurs, and I give you each $1,000, and I ask you to convert that $1,000 to $100,000 by having a strategy using your ideas. And what I want you to do is to present that strategy to a group of your classmates a little later on. Now, I'm sure most of you are now thinking, what do I do with my $1,000 to arrive at 100,000, to multiply it as much as I can? But in this particular competition, or in this particular lecture, if I tell you that the group who won the lecture did not actually use the $1,000 at all, because for them, the $1,000 was constraining. It was limiting their thinking. So what they actually did, they went out and saw the executives in the particular city and say, look, we have a whole group of very brilliant students in our class who are going to do a presentation about how you can multiply $1,000 to $100,000. We want to sell you the rights to that presentation. And obviously, these executives were very keen to pay because they wanted to recruit the best minds. So they actually bought the idea, which meant that the group who won did not use the $1,000 at all, because for them, the $1,000 was constraining. Another thought that I would want you to look at when you're making a decision is to embrace the idea of a postmortem, which is to actually look at the after effects of your decision. What would happen if my decision is made? What would it look like? That will allow you to actually paint a picture that doesn't limit you or limit your thinking. The next thing I will want you to talk about is to consider the notion of failure. What would happen if my decision leads to failure? And I'll give you another example of why I say this. In colonial India, the colonialists had a huge problem with cobras, wild snakes. And they thought several times, how do we deal with this problem? And could not come up with a solution. So they decided that they were going to pay everybody who brought a live cobra for it to be killed. Now, at the beginning, the idea was very successful. That decision was a very successful one. Everybody brought them cobras to be slaughtered. But what the colonialists then realized was the cobras they were bringing were never ending. It was an unending bringing in of cobras. But actually what had happened, some very savvy Indians decided to breed cobras so that they could be bringing them in to make money. So they were breeding a lot of cobras that they were bringing in. So the Brits decided to drop the idea, and the guys who were breeding cobras no longer had any use for their cobras, so they released them in the wild. So the problem got worse. And that is because they didn't consider what failure would look like when they were putting out and making that decision. The next thing I would also want you to consider is the basics. And this time around, I will use an example of our own situation in the Gambia during the COVID-19 response. Now, government at some point decided that they were going to distribute food to needy households. And here, if you are considering the basics, I wanted to challenge some of our, particularly our mobile companies, in terms of their strategy and their thinking on this. Once the government made that decision, if you consider the basics, what they wanted to do was to make sure that every household got rice and I think oil and something else which I can't remember. But basically they wanted to get food to the table of households. Now, at this point, if government are going to do it, they're going to use physical money. They're going to take money, pay the suppliers, pay the transporters to actually deliver this food. And in the process, they would have to register the beneficiaries to know where they are to deliver. All of us saw it out. You know, the food was at the McCarthy Square, the trucks were going in and out, some got stolen, some got lost, so on and so forth. Now, if the mobile phone companies were thinking, in my view, maybe they did, where we are now, they could have gone over to the government and said, look, we have something called mobile money. Why don't we offer you this platform to get whatever amount of money everybody needs to get the rice and the oil they need? You don't need to pay us cash now. What we can do is to negotiate a deferred tax payment with you. You can deduct it from our tax liability later. And the reason they can do that is that physical money is not changing hands. It's basically paper money. So that decision, had it been made, could have been very transformational for both the mobile companies and the government. The mobile companies would get their penetration significantly higher, which is what they're paying a lot of money every day to advertise for. That penetration would increase significantly. Government would make money on that. They would collect taxes. They wouldn't need to take out the $700 million or so they took out. That can stay in the treasury, and it would have been a win-win. But the reason why probably nobody did that is the way we are wired. We are wired to think instructively. So I'm going to distribute food trucks, the physical stuff, so on and so forth. So when you consider those basics all the time in making decisions and expand your boundaries, you can make decisions that make sense and are transformational. Now, to cap that up, I'll give you an example, again, of considering constraints under stress. Most of you will remember the US Airways flight that landed in the, in the US some time back in the Hudson River. Now, this aeroplane took off from LaGuardia Airport, and immediately after takeoff, it encountered a bird strike from some wild geese, and the pilot lost both engines. So he radioed to the control tower and he said, I have lost both my engines. And immediately the control tower went into default mode. So they said to him, you can either land at New Jersey or New York, both of which are 4 minutes away. You make a choice. Now, the captain immediately decided to think about what constraints he had under stress. And he said to them, we'll be at the Hudson. He basically declined the offer of the airports, and he said to them, we'll be at the Hudson. And at that point, he forgot about the guys in the control tower. And the guys at the control tower sat and watched what was going on. And he immediately took over from the co-pilot and said to him, read me the altitude and the level of the descent. Now, the reason this pilot did that was he thought about the constraints. He considered failure as well. If I attempt to go to New York or New Jersey, these are very densely populated cities. And if I attempt to go into any of them, I can have a problem to the extent that I may not be able to get to that airport. So he decided that he was not going to do that. What he was going to do is to land at the Hudson River. Because if he failed in trying to land in New York or New Jersey, what he would have successfully done is to lose significantly more lives than he would otherwise lose if he went into the Hudson River. So he decided to land in the Hudson River, and he did land in the Hudson River. And in so doing, he actually saved all the lives. Nobody died. To the point that the pilot had time after landing to work through the airplane and make sure everybody got out. Now, instinctively, many of us would not have done that. We would have allowed the control tower to lead us. But he didn't do that. And the reason he didn't do that, I invite you to think, is because he considered the constraints and he considered failure. And that is why he made that decision. So that is a very powerful thinking mechanism, to always consider failure and to not worry about the constraints. Don't worry about what is constraining you. I always say to my colleagues when I work in the NGO sector that let's stop agonizing, let's organize. Agonizing stops us from organizing. So you organize rather than agonize. And when you organize, you become strategic and you're able to move. Now, moving on. Now, decision-making, again, in my view, really is the most powerful tool we all possess. You know, the effects of the decisions we make are very significant. Like Dwight Eisenhower put it very cleverly. He said the history of freedom is never written by chance, but by choice. In other words, to have your freedom, it depends on the choices you make. And those choices are very powerful. And again, I will give you an example of that. There's a thinking frame called game theory. Now, game theory is a very interesting thinking mechanism, and I will explain it a bit. I don't want to put it on slides because it'd be difficult. Now, if you think about the game theories talk about the prisoner matrix. And what this prisoner matrix is that you have two prisoners who have committed a crime. So now they're being offered three choices. The first choice is to both confess and they will serve 2 years in prison. The second choice is not to confess and they will serve 5 years in prison each. The third choice is either one of them becomes a snitch against the other. In other words, you speak about the other as the one who committed the crime and give the evidence and serve as a witness, and you will get 0 years. You don't go to prison, but the other prisoner will get 10 years. Now, as you can imagine, instinctively, every prisoner would probably go for the last option, which is to be a snitch against the other. That will be the decision they make. But actually, the most optimal decision they can both make is to actually both speak the truth and serve 2 years each. Now, that is what you would think would be the logical choice. Now, that in decision-making theory is called the Nash equilibrium. That's where you expect them to be. But the prisoners will not make that choice. The choice they probably are more likely to make is to snitch against the other, and they all end up in the worst place. They will both serve 10 years. Now, if you think about our real lives, this is what actually goes on in our real lives in some of the decisions we make. But if I move this and situate it in a global context, you will all remember the Cold War, the years of the Cold War, when the Berlin Wall fell down. And the Cold War was about three things. It was about nuclear proliferation, it was about ideology, and it was about economics. That's what the Cold War was about. Whether to be a capitalist or a socialist, you're not going to have nuclear proliferation. So there were nuclear proliferation treaties all over the place, and so on, and the ideology of communism or capitalism. Now, when the Berlin Wall fell, we all witnessed it. America celebrated. They celebrated victory. Now, in celebrating victory, they assumed the war was over. Now, fast forward to today, what do we have? We have Iran, we have North Korea, who now represent nuclear proliferation. We have religious extremism in both forms, in Judaism, in Christianity, in Islam. We see that as something that is going on. Again, and the economics of the world, China running a state control system against the US running a capitalist system. And China is likely to take over from the US as the largest economy on the world in the next few years. So basically, the phenomenon has replicated itself in a different way. So what game theory suggests? Game theory suggests that you look at the world in two forms, in a finite form and in an infinite form. In the finite form, you're driven by interest. It's what you're interested in that makes you make decisions. In the infinite form, you're driven by values. What values do I have to allow me make a decision? Now, the disruptors, the people who deliver change, tend to come from the value side. And I'll give you this example by citing two individuals that you all know and see every time, Barack Obama and Donald Trump. When Barack Obama was president, whenever he had a problem, there was a constant statement he made, which was, this is not who we are. This is not what we are about. That was the catchphrase for Obama. For Trump, we're gonna deal with you. We're gonna, come hitting. We have the best weapons in the world. So he's driven largely by interest, and it's finite. He looks at the short term. For him, it's a short-term game, I'm gonna win. And his decisions are informed like that. TikTok is a classic example where we're facing. I'll put out an executive order to deal with it. Whereas with Obama, it was always about, this is not who we are. And he was value driven. He was thinking about the long game. And that is why he tried to have the Iran nuclear deal. In the Iran nuclear deal, he accepted the imperfections. But for him, he realized that this was a long-term game. So these decisions you make need to take care of the long term. You have to understand people's values, people's thinking, and how people react. Another good example of this is the tool we are all using now, Facebook. What Facebook have done is they have taken decision-making and flipped it on its head. So Facebook considered three main issues when he was developing his platform. The first issue he considered was the notion of speech and the notion of speaking the truth. And Facebook chose speech over truth. So anybody can go to Facebook, do a video and say what you want. Whether it's the truth, whether it's informed, whether it's founded, it doesn't matter. You can go in and say it. On the question of speed and perfection, Facebook chose speed. When you're doing your Facebook video, nobody edits you. You don't have to do what Fatou Camara has done, I'm sure, before coming. Sort out the makeup, sort out the sound, sort out this, that, and the other. You don't need to do that. You just go in and bam, there you are. So they choose speed over perfection. And the last one was scale over safety. Facebook chose scale. They wanted to have scale. They wanted people to hear them everywhere. Now, what has this done? What has this decision done? That decision has created the notion of fake news. For example, fake grappling with today. But even more dangerous, it has created a window for sinister views to be replicated. And it has also created a view for very, very good and sharp minds to think differently and be able to dictate whether it's in politics, it's in economics, it's in daily life. If you use the flip that Mark Zuckerberg has done, you can move forward. And you know, if Fatou Camara gets a rumor, the first thing she thinks, I'm going to verify it. I cannot publish what I will verify. In fact, I have heard her say that several times. I have got the information, but I need to verify it. But Facebook is challenging that concept. And they have said, and the problem is, nobody prepared for Facebook. Our policymakers were not thinking, our lawmakers were thinking, so it's totally unregulated, which is why you have all these hearings going on now to retrospectively think, how do I regulate? Now, that is where cutting edge thinking and decision-making matters. And I'll share with you a matrix later on to demonstrate how that can really be valuable. Because in 2017, actually, Mark Zuckerberg was so bold, he made another decision to do a global manifesto. And in the global manifesto, interestingly, he said he was looking to build a global community to deal with global issues. And he didn't need a political party. He didn't need anything other than the global community he has in Facebook. Now, he is right. He is as big as China. There are 2 billion subscribers in Facebook. And he has them under his wraps. He has all our data. He has all our information. He has all our habits. He has the way we think. In fact, some cutting-edge thinkers are moving away. And now when you do a Google search, when we want to know anything, we normally do a Google search. Now, there is something called Ahoona search. It's A-H-O-O-N-A. It's a new search engine that actually tracks you online. It tracks you to understand the way you think, the way you reflect, your likes, your dislikes, so that when you hit a search engine in Ahoona, it actually brings you results driven by your mindset and the type of person you are. Again, the power of decision making. Someone has thought outside the box and said, look, I can do this. And if you remember the whole debacle about Donald Trump and the election and him using the particular company that he used to win the elections. If you remember, before the elections, Facebook offered both the Democrats and the Republicans Facebook staff to be located in their campaigns. Now, the Democrats declined, thinking the way we all do, thinking morally, thinking the right way. They declined. But hey, presto, Donald Trump accepted. And through those people, he was able to learn that actually you can target very, 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 very sharply people you want to communicate and send them the same message every day, and they will end up believing it. If you look at our own context in Gambia today, when we think poverty, when we think, youth unemployment, it's likely urban. Poverty is now urban. But the difference between poverty a few years back and poverty today is every poor person is able to connect. You know, if you look at being able to buy a social media bundle for $10 every day, many people can afford to do that. So it brings a different type of audience and a different type of dynamic that should drive how policy is made, how thinking is done. And I'll come to that point a little bit later on. Now, let me come back to this notion of exploring our brains and our minds, our core decision-making tool. Let's take the COVID-19 pandemic again as an example. If you all remember, the WHO Director General, Gabriel Selassie, you will all remember him saying the key to this is testing, testing, testing. He kept saying that. And let me try and explore for you why he made that decision. Why did he make that decision? Most of you will not know, but Gebreyesus Mariam was a minister of health in Ethiopia. And a couple of years back, I can't remember, around 2012, 2013, there was a radio program on an air. And some guy came to the radio program, very eloquent, and really criticized him quite heavily. He really took him apart. And everybody expected him to react with anger. But guess what he did the next day? He went over to the radio station and found out where this man was located. He went and met him and brought him to the ministry and offered him the job of deputy minister and said to him, you deliver what you've been talking about. I have given you an opportunity to do so. And together they were able, for example, they had a policy of creating 38,000 female medical staff across Ethiopia. And they were able to do that. By the way, he comes from Eritrea. Now, before the separation. Now, the reason I am making this point, the reason why Gebreyesus was talking about testing, testing, testing. When he was a kid, he lost one of his brothers by a very preventable disease. And he thought this could easily have been me. But he said one day walking down the road with his mom, he saw a billboard advertising vaccinations on smallpox. So when you now move this to what I was talking about, considering failure, considering constraints, to the current issue of the COVID pandemic, can any one of you tell me any major global disease that has been eradicated apart from smallpox? We're all living with HIV. We're all living with TB. We're all living with malaria and all of these other diseases that are serious killers. But what has the world done? The world has learned to live with them once they understood what these diseases were. And in a way, when Haile Mariam was trying to say testing, 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 his vision was of a place where we were able to test, we were able to isolate, we were able to social distance, we were able to prevent and not bring the world to a standstill. HIV has not brought the world to a standstill. Malaria has not brought the world to a standstill. And he was trying to move us towards that decision without making the decision himself. He was asking us to explore how do we work to solve this issue, because he also knows. And this is a topic that I will invite TAF to ask someone to do a presentation, is understanding the political economy of the world. Gebreyesus is thinking that when there is a vaccine, that vaccine is not likely to get to us in a universal way in the Gambia for another 5-6 years to come, because the politics of money will take over. So who gets the vaccine first? Logic would dictate that you give it to the most vulnerable across the globe and immunize them and move on forward. So universal access. Now, Gebreyesus, when he was positioning himself for the WHO job, one of the principles he espoused was universal access to healthcare, dealing with inequality in medicine and things like that. And that runs counter to the principles that people like Donald Trump start for. So that automatically generates conflict between them. But as Africans, what we need to understand is this is the first African who has made it this far. And he is no, as they say in Wolof here, he is no chomo. He is a very bright guy who has built a trajectory to get to where he is. Now, the reason I'm giving this example is to push the idea of us Africans. We need to be more confident. We need to be more assertive. We have champions. We have people who can hold a worldview and hold their own. And we must be willing to do the research, to understand these things, to support the way the world operates. Now, understanding the political economy is very important. When this vaccine comes out, the price, number one, is going to be prohibitive because the medical pharmaceuticals are going to recover their costs, whatever you do. Whether people are dying or not, it's not going to be their first call. And we already have an example. The French company, who are slightly ahead, made it very clear that America was their preoccupation. That's where they wanted their vaccine to get to. So if you think when a vaccine comes, the problem is solved, well, then you don't know what's coming. So in our own context, we need to be making the decisions now. How do we cope in a context like that? Again, going back to what Hebrisius was saying, testing, isolating, maintaining safe distances, getting people to understand that that is the way you respond. Make that decision now so that people learn to cope and our economies move on. Moving on. Now, what decisions do we make on a daily basis? Now, none of us has a crystal ball. And again, taking the WHO example, Ghebreyesus is standing his ground on the basis that, look, I am encouraging testing because I have a logic that says we are not anywhere near a solution. This is going to come a little bit further down the line. So what we need to do is focus on coping mechanisms until that point comes. But where he sits, he probably cannot say it like that, because he may be accused of being irresponsible, given how many deaths are coming. But that's the thinking. Now, Sweden went the other extreme. Sweden went for the herd mentality. Allow as many people as possible to be infected, and they will develop immunity. Now, the pros and cons of a policy like that, I am not going to talk about. But what I am saying is you've got to learn to make decisions and make them all the time. Because you've got to remember that if you don't make a decision yourself, somebody else will make it for you. And in a way, dare I say, in our continent, that's what we've done with COVID-19. We've allowed the decisions to be made elsewhere, and we have followed. We have not been bold to come out and make our own decisions on the subject. I mean, bar Rwanda probably, but the jury's out on that. Now, moving on, how do you make your decisions? Do you make your decisions intuitively, or do you reason them? There are people who, in an instant, they'll make a decision. But there are others who will reflect, who will move away, think about it, and make a decision. But in so doing, always remember, when you seek perfection, it may prevent action. If you try to make your decisions perfect all the time, that could lead to inaction, because you just end up not deciding, because the options are too many, the probabilities are many, the possibilities are many. But more importantly, let me read you this statement that was actually said by a Danish philosopher called Søren Kierkegaard. Søren Kierkegaard said, life can only be understood backwards, but you have to live it forward. Thus, you cannot make decisions after. Decisions have to be taken without knowing the consequences. In other words, we don't live our lives by living tomorrow before yesterday. You will live yesterday before you live tomorrow. Now, we all hear it being said, oh, with hindsight. Now, hindsight is a good thing. But when you're making a decision about a live issue, you do not have hindsight. You have got to make that decision. What does that mean? That means you need to learn to deal with uncertainty. Now, learning to deal with uncertainty is a very interesting thing. In all our lives, you've gotten to, say, the age 60, and you say, oh, really, the education I have got is very good. So the decision I made to go to that university is a very good one. The decision, the way I made to marry a wife, ex or husband, Y, was a good one or was a terrible one, because you have the benefit of hindsight. But you've got to live forward. That decision, when you made it, you didn't have the facts that you have now when you're making that statement. So that invites the notion of dealing with uncertainty in decision making. Now, uncertainty is a very difficult issue. So let's explore that for a minute. I will argue that the key to innovation in our world has been dealing with uncertainty. If you look at the Mark Zuckerberg example, when he was thinking about those three criteria that I gave you, focusing on speed, and scale, it was very uncertain. He wasn't sure how the world would take that. He wasn't sure whether the moment he says that regulation will stop him. He wasn't sure that the moment he said that people's values and morals will impede him, he will not be able to push that idea forward. But that did not stop him from making that decision. He still pushed ahead and said, look, this is a decision I wish to make, and I am going to make it. Because now, in the world today, you have something called disruption and disintermediation. Now, what do I mean by disruption and disintermediation? If you can all think back to the Kodak camera, many years ago, when we wanted to take a photo, we bought a Kodak camera. Today, that Kodak camera is obsolete. Nobody wants it. There are many of us listening right now who, when we have a headache, where do we go first? Google or WebMD. We Google, I have a headache, what should I do? And you get a series of options thrown at you. And you move out. So on and so forth. So this world is a world where change is a constant, uncertainty. So what we need to do is we need to embrace disruption. The people who disrupt, who call themselves disruptors, we need to embrace them because they are the ones who are going to cause us to think differently. And that means moving out of our comfort zone. Because these are people who are driven by wanting things to be better all the time. And sometimes it leads to impatience and it leads them to actions that none of us can recognize or relate to. But if we want to build new leadership, they need to learn to associate in their thinking and their ways of life the notion of disruption. Now, disintermediation, what do I mean by disintermediation? Now, I used to work in an INGO where we used to do food distribution. And subsequently, the donors decided that the food distribution needs to transform into cash distribution. So we had a whole infrastructure to deal with cash infrastructure, police escorts, people who go around knocking at houses, pieces of paper that you can sign. Hey, presto, M-Pesa came to Kenya, mobile money. And they wrote a proposal that was 100 times cheaper than us. We didn't see it coming. We were sleeping on the job. And from then on, we actually created a department to work on co-creation and co-convening. What do I mean by co-creation and co-convening? It was a department specifically where you put the sharpest minds you have to constantly think what's coming tomorrow. Like the example I gave earlier on the food distribution around QCell and AfriCell. If they had a co-creation or co-convening team, more than likely they would have thought about that idea and said, well, why don't we try? I mean, there's no harm. You could have gone to government and said, we can offer you this. And it wouldn't involve theft. Theft would go. Everybody would be traceable. We have the data already. These are registered subscribers. They have given us their ID cards. So all those processes that probably cost $50 million during the process, you could have disintermediated. And it would have meant more food on the table for people. Now, that's what dealing with uncertainty does. It allows people who disrupt, people who have disruptive minds to emerge. And we need to learn to embrace them, notwithstanding the inconveniences they bring, sometimes the anger they bring to us. But we need to learn to live with it, because that's how we're going to move forward and be transformational in the way we do things. Now, moving on. If you want to, for example, know everything early, then you're never going to make a decision, because we just do not live in a world that's like that. There are going to be many things that you don't know or don't know about before you make a decision. It's just a matter of making sure that you've built yourself to deal with this, because if you know everything, then you're basically dealing with facts. And dealing with facts is not exciting. Now, can someone be keeping me on track on how I am doing about time?
Well,
now,
no, yeah, go ahead.
In terms of decision making, when you're making decisions, you very often don't have all the facts, but you still have to make the decision. Again, those are the boundaries of uncertainty. It invites you to deal with uncertainty. Now, moving on, dealing with the unknown and how that stimulates decision making. Now, dealing with the unknown is a very interesting phenomenon, and I will give you a slide later to actually talk extensively about dealing with the unknown. But let me just give you a few examples of what I mean by dealing with the unknown. If you wake up in the morning and you decide that, well, today I am going to try and invent something new around whatever your discipline is, whether you're a journalist or someone, and you say, I'm going to invent something new. So I'm going to take a blank piece of paper and map out what is it that I need to discover. So you say, what is most in need in my sector? Now, to get to that decision, you've got to be able to bring something that almost certainly doesn't exist, to be able to challenge yourself adequately. It has to be something that nobody has seen before or nobody knows. Now, I always use this to say the most creative people in business are the people who do this on a regular basis. Let me give you an example. And permit me, TAF and Fatu, to say this in Wolof, because if I say it in English, I might do direct translation. Nit du namalum xamut. Do muna namalo xamut. You cannot miss what you don't know. So in order for that to happen, you need to create the thing that people don't know, get them to learn about it, get them to know it, to start using it. That's what testing your abilities to deal with the unknown can do. And that's where innovation comes. That's where high-level creativity comes. Because you've put yourself in a space where you're making decisions about doing things that nobody has done. And the entire innovation world, the entire creative world, that's where they work. They work in this area of decision-making, constantly dealing with the unknown. And honestly, if you are going to create transformational leaders, that's what we need to do. We need to push them into this space where they're thinking differently, they're behaving differently, and they're running their life differently. I mean, I'll give you an example. When I go to bed at night with my wife, I decide that I will only talk to her about one thing. Because my wife on an average day has 20 ideas. And she is convinced she can deliver the entire 20 ideas. So when you come home, the first thing she does is throw you 5 ideas. While you're processing those, she throws you another 5. So I say to her, now let's negotiate. I will only consider one idea at a time. But actually, that's a very good thing, because that's a person who constantly thinks that she can create something that you don't know, something that can be transformational. And that is a skill you need to have and nurture. Now, moving on, what does that mean? That means you need to learn to deal with stress. You need to learn to deal with stress, high levels of stress, because trying to create somebody that nobody knows means constant stress, because you're pushing yourself beyond normal human limits. And again, that means getting out of your comfort zone, because it is going to be uncomfortable to try and operate in a space where you don't normally operate. So these are components that come as a result. Now, moving on. Now, I want to throw a question to the audience. And Fatu, if you can do me a favor, the audience can give me their answers just by typing on the comments column. And what I would want you to do later is to collate the results for me. So now, if I ask you the question that you have 20 movies to select from, imagine you're sitting down and you have 20 movies to select from. How quickly will you make a decision? If quickly, very quickly is 1. A little more quickly 2. Very, very difficult, I'll take my time is 10. So the scale is between 1 to 10. Just type as an individual where you are. Are you a number 1, a number 2, a number 3, a number 4, or number 5? And Fatu, all I want you to do is at the end, group them. Those who are beginning between 1 to 5, and those who are between 6 and 10. So you give me, like, there are 30 people between 1 and 5, there are 20 people between 6 and 10. And I will hatchet a guess where the majority will be later. But I'll give you why I have done that. Now, how are we doing with time? Because I know we divided this into 2. And in my timing, I should have done the first 15 minutes by now.
Oh my God. You have done much more than that. I think you have done, I've not been timing, but it's about 8 o'clock our time here. So I guess.
I cannot hear you.
Oh, you cannot hear me? Can everyone else hear me? My mic is on.
Yeah, go on. I can hear you now.
Okay, right. I say, well, I guess you have definitely spoken for more than 30 minutes. Fatu, correct me if I'm wrong?
Yes, it's about that, yeah. It's over 30 minutes, actually.
It's over 30 minutes.
We've been on 49 minutes now.
Yeah, about 30 minutes.
Do you want to take your first break or do you want me to continue?
No, we will not have a break now. We will not take a break. I think you should just continue. And if you can wrap up in the next 15 minutes,
All
you know,
right,
because actually I am handling the fellows who are on Zoom, and I can see that the survey is on, and then Fatu is handling Facebook. But continue while so that we can collect this for you. Just continue.
All right. Okay, brilliant. All right.
But
now,
target 15 minutes. You can time yourself for 15 minutes, huh?
Okay, brilliant. Now, I have asked this question. If you remember earlier, I had said I was going to suggest to you a matrix about decision-making, dealing with unknowns, dealing with knowns, and so on. Now, this matrix was actually developed, well, the basis of the matrix was developed by somebody who I will not recommend you hire to make decisions for you, Donald Rumsfeld, the former defense secretary in the US. But it was a very good thinking tool when he developed it. Now, let me share it on the screen, and I will try and explain what he's trying to get at. Now, in this matrix, you've got things that are known and things that are unknown. And I have charted them out in a matrix. And the matrix has 4 sections. Now, section number 1 is dealing with the known. So something that's known and known. The top left and the bottom left. It's known like closing a door. You know you're going to close the door. That's a known fact. No dispute about that. Close the door, you close the door. There's no problem there. Now, something that is known, but for the minute is unknown. For example, if you observe the stock market, you know that the stock market is going to go up and is going to come down. But you don't know when that going up and coming down is going to be. But there are people who choose to exercise their minds around that area, that they are going to predict what the known unknowns are and when they're going to happen. So the decisions that they make are informed by thinking in that matrix. Then you have people who deal with the known unknown. The known unknown is something like your gut feeling. For example, you know, what's my inner feeling? What's my intuition? So, you know, it's an unknown, but somehow you know it. This is my intuition. Now, the most interesting part, and the part where really I think leadership will come from, is people who try to make decisions in the last area, the known unknowns. For example, 9/11. If somebody tried to imagine 9/11 beforehand, possibly there was no one in the world who could have done that. If somebody tried to imagine, say, Pearl Harbor with the Americans and the Japanese and the use of kamikazes, and more recently, suicide bombers, you know, how do you imagine something like that? An unknown. Nobody knows what it is. Nobody can imagine it. Now, this is where the best innovative minds are. This is where the most creative minds are, because they're pushing themselves to say, there's something that can happen in this world that nobody is thinking about, that nobody knows. That's where invention happens. That's where new ideas come from. So you explore those things in a very, very deep way and say, what are these unknown unknowns that I need to deal with? Now, if you look at, for example, currently, who do I use as a best example to give you? Globally, Apple and Google. Apple and Google are in this section here. They're trying to push the bar, you know, a driverless car, a car that drives itself around anywhere in the world. These are people who are working in this area. Now, let's bring it back home. If we take QCell and AfriCell, in their own reduced environment, I'm sure they're doing the same. They're trying to operate in this area to say, where do we make these inventions? Now, but remember, these are things that the moment you are there, you've got to deliver things that you get right from the word go. Because if you deliver a new invention and get it wrong, you're going to lose trust. Nobody is going to trust you going forward. People are going to feel that we cannot rely on you. Now, why do I give you this matrix? It's to demonstrate that in the world we live in, there are 2 relationships going on. The world itself is not finite. Although all our lives are going to end, and at some point, yes, the world is going to come to an end, but we don't know how long, we don't know how far. And to that extent, it feels like an infinite world. So where do you want to be in terms of ideas and thinking? To be constant, to be consistent, you're better off being in a place where you are driven by a set of values, a set of beliefs, things that guide you. Now, if on the other hand, you decide that the world is going to finite, you're going to be driven by your interests. Now, when you are driven by your interests, what happens? People chop and change, people flip, people make all sorts of choices. Now, the word integrity comes from the earlier version. People who are driven by values, people who are driven by beliefs, and a matrix that guides the way they think, that guides what they accept and they do not accept. That's where the word integrity comes from. And you hear that banded around in politics, in global discourse, in business and everywhere. The reason for that is people are making decisions all the time, but people are not stepping back to explore, why am I making these decisions? What is guiding my making of these decisions? So what that results in is that a significant number of us are followers, just because we don't push the bar as individuals. So we tend to follow. So if something happens, if you have a trigger and you need to make a decision, there are many of us who just follow a habit. They follow a habit or they follow a norm. And on that basis, they make a decision and they move on. But if, in fact, they're not making a decision, they're just following. Because there's a habit that has been established, so you follow it. Now, the people on the other end of the spectrum who have core values that they go by tend to be in the minority. Because for them, every decision matters, no matter how small, no matter how big. They want to explore that decision on the basis of things that they can recognize. And in fact, in the detective world, they use this a lot. When a detective interviews you, and you start saying, I am speaking the truth, but I need to remember, the alarm bells start ringing immediately. And the reason for that is a simple assumption that when you're speaking the truth, you don't need to remember. Because there's only one truth. And if that's what you're saying, you don't need to start saying, I don't remember. Now, it's a matrix that they use to determine who do I probe more, who do I not probe more. Now, of course, criminals will learn it and make sure that when they're being interviewed, but your instinct will not let you. You will always go back to your default. So if you're going to be a good decision maker, you need to first and foremost make that decision. Am I going to be driven by my core values, my core beliefs to arrive at a decision? Or am I going to be driven by my interests? Now, when you're in business, this is a very difficult question to answer. It's even worse when you're in politics. Dare I say 95% of people in politics are on the other end of the spectrum. It's largely, interest-based, interest-driven, and understandably so, because it's a finite venture. It's a 5-year venture or a 10-year venture, so you need to focus on the interests you have. But there will be people on the other side who are value-based. And a good dichotomy for this is the politicians and our civil servants. What you want is a relationship where a significant number of our civil servants are on the other side of the spectrum, where they're driven by values, they're driven by core beliefs, they're driven by an environment they want to sustain for the greater good. That's what drives them. And that's what they espouse on a daily basis. And that way they are able to check the people who are on the other side. And I am not for 1 minute suggesting that interests are wrong or interests are a bad thing, because you can have a business interest that's finite and wonderful, and you wish to pursue it. But that's just how the relationship works. Now, let me go back to the question I had asked, if you have collated the result. I suspect the majority will be on the 1 to 5 side.
Yes.
Are they?
Mm-hmm. It's
Yes.
1, 5, and then 4.
How many are on the 1 to 5?
5, about 10 on 5.
10 on the 1 to 5 and 5, yes. Now, basically, the reason I asked this question, the people who are on the 1 to 5 side, we call them satisficers, people who are easily satisfied. So, they make a decision and they're satisfied, they're happy, that's it. They take what they get. In Wolof, you hear it every time, Luma am jël. Those are the people on the other end of the extreme are the maximizers. These are people who are never satisfied with the decision.
The 8 and 9. The 8
Sorry?
and the 9. The 8 and the 9.
Well, the 8 and the 9s are still maximizers. They are on the other end of the extreme. And there are some who are completely off that grid. They are probably 11 or 12.
Yeah, Ousainou, sorry to interrupt you. I was taking the, I was collating the fellows, and 45 of them, you know, voted. Out of the 45, 32 are from 1 to 5. So the remaining 13, they are from 6 to 10.
That's what I expect.
Yeah.
It's usually the case. And that's a proper representation of life. The maximizers tend to be in the minority because they want to push the bar all the time. And there are some who even go outside that 1 to 5, and in that they are 10s and 12s because they're way, way, way out because they're always pushing the bar. Now, neither is good or bad. Neither is good or bad. But what it demonstrates is that people have places that they prefer. The 1 to 5ers tend generally to be very satisfied. They make a decision, they're satisfied, end of story, they don't go anywhere. So why did I ask that question? It's basically to get back to the whole point of decisions and why do we make it. So basically you need to set your own standard. What will be my criteria for making a decision? Do I consider the constraints? Do I consider failure? Do I consider success? Do I work within the constraints that I am given? What do I do? So when you have a problem, do you make a decision that is informed, or do you default to the habits you have? Now, it's very critical that you ensure as a human, you explore yourself, you explore your relationships to determine where do you fall within this matrix to help you grow and to help you make the right decisions as you move forward. Now, secondly, how do you manage yourself? If you remember, I gave you the example of our education system being very instructive. Now, the most successful decisions when they are made in a collaborative sphere. You need to interact. You need to work with people. And let me explore this a little bit more. The education system is very instructive. So you go to primary school, you go to high school, you go to university, you come out with a degree. But very often, you find people who are extremely creative who cannot handle this environment. So what do? They drop out of school and they go and do something else. You know, just to give you the example that everybody gives, Steve Jobs and Bill Gates. They dropped out of school and went to explore something else. Well, let me give you this example in our own context in the whole real world. And I'll use Gambia as an example. If I wanted to be an engineer, most people expect me to go to primary school, high school, and a university studying engineering. Similarly, if I wanted to be a dentist, if I wanted to be a building contractor, so on and so forth. But these environments define a time frame. They tell you you've got to get your bachelor's degree in 3 years. So recently, Rwanda came up with an idea. Rwanda were short of ophthalmologists. So they decided that they were going to train ophthalmologists not based on a university curriculum, but based on a relationship with the East African Council of Ophthalmologists, where ophthalmologists will be trained on the basis of their ability to absorb knowledge. So you can graduate after 10 years, you can graduate after 1 year, you can graduate after 3 years. Well, what they're doing is they're teaching you and recognizing your capacity on the basis of your level of absorption. Now, that's nothing new. We have it in the Gambia. Some of our best mechanics never went to school. Some of our best building contractors never went to school. Now imagine if we had created a matrix for certifying them as bachelor's or master's or PhD, we would have. But what is stopping us from doing that? Because we are confined and constrained by boundaries. The boundaries of a qualification, as far as we know it, are defined by a university degree. So even though the guy who has learned the trade from childhood and has perfected it and can deal with anything will never be recognized as a qualified engineer. So what Rwanda have done is they have flipped that argument. And they are now certifying ophthalmologists who have not sat in a university chair, nor a university table, nor attended. And you can Google this and find it out. It's a decision they made recently. I don't think it's even a week old. But I'm just, again, exploring the power of decision making, the power of the mind, what you can achieve, what you can do. Imagine if we were able to do that here, the amount of people we will absorb and bring on into a formal setting. There are so many carpenters, so many builders, so many mechanics that are extremely qualified, but we consider them outside the formal sector because they operate elsewhere. So again, if we're going to build new leadership that's transformational, that's the type of thinking you want to invite, so that you're able to value every member of society by using criteria that's broad-based, that's diverse. And that can only happen if we are much more collaborative, if we are much more conversational, if we have more conversations. I mean, I'll give you a good example of what I mean. Now, our biggest problem in dealing with COVID-19 is to spread the message of social distancing, testing, wearing of masks. Now, Gambia is beginning to be one of the countries where you have the highest proliferation of online media. So many media houses, so many online platforms. Now, and I invite you, Fatu, to take this on. Imagine if you were to invite all your online operators, your television networks, your media houses, and say, let's do a Gambia Day. Let's deliver for Gambia. Once a month, we're going to have a Gambia Day. We're going to take a subject matter, for example, COVID-19 now. We're going to bring subject matter specialists. We're going to bring 2 permanent people who sit with us, who research the subject matter thoroughly, and 2 people who hold diverse views. And the criteria has to be, you have got to speak and deliver verifiable information. Now that will become a counterforce to the online problem we now have. It will become a counterforce to the fake news. It will become the counterforce to everybody waking up from your house, doing a Facebook video and giving it a go and saying whatever you want. Because it's a Gambia Day. All the media houses unite. They all broadcast it at the same time. And it's about a subject matter of substance for the nation. We sit, we debate it, we hear each other out, and we work together collaboratively. You know, it's not one idea dominates the other or one idea is better, but the Gambian has got to be able to hear all the ideas in a truthful, safe environment and process it, notwithstanding Facebook and the fake news. That needs to happen. It has its own value. But we need to find a counter value. And credit to TAF for having these lectures being delivered, because it will become the medium through which all these ideas will come out from other presenters as it goes on, to be able to develop a platform that really gives us movement towards national cohesion. Because, you know, like I gave you the example of Gabriel Ali, the guy who went online and criticized him, and he brought him and said, do the job. Any one of us who occupies a senior level position, and I can tell you about it, your inbox will be inundated on a daily basis about new ideas. So what you need to do, you need to allow a channel for those ideas to be heard, and to an extent to be processed, so that people can say, okay, this was the idea, we've listened to it, we've talked about it, actually it makes sense, we're going to go with it, or it doesn't make sense. So I really implore you, Fatu, for the media to look at being part of the positive messaging, to counterbalance, you know, the plethora of mediums we have to get information from that are not necessarily verifiable. So that needs to happen. And credit to you, there are a lot of platforms. I mean, my biggest inspiration comes from plowing through Facebook and reading articles from several Gambians of impeccable minds who are delivering wonderful articles. But what we need to do is to bring this to a space where every Gambian will accept that when I get this information from this source, it is because it is towards building a nation. It is because it is towards developing national cohesion. It's not about interest. It's about building for the nation. It's about trying to move the nation forward so that we are not stuck. We are not stuck in arguments. We are not stuck in dislike. We are not stuck in hatred. But we are actually moving towards building a nation where people can feel they have a stake. They have a view that they can express. Now, moving on. The last few things about decision making. You've got to be able to test in your head, how am I going to implement this decision? What would it look like if I implement it. You've got to be able to review and reflect about that decision and reflect about yourself as well. What brought me to this decision? Why did I make this decision? And you've got to be able to accept and take feedback. Now, all of these things that I have said represents the lives we live. You know, life itself is a game. If you go back to the gameplay example I gave you, most of us process life in terms of winners and losers. That's what most of us do. We think that, you know, someone has to win and someone has to lose. But actually, it need not necessarily be that. If we are much more collaborative, if we are much more open to sharing of ideas and thought, we could well find ourselves in a space where you all feel we are winners. Just because we're being listened to, we're being heard. And that really can be a reflection of how you build a progressive society. Once you build a society where everybody feels that they are part of that society, they can build, they can contribute, they can throw their ideas, we move away from a more negative force of winners and losers. And inherent in winners and losers is conflict. And inherent in conflict is on the development and being slow. And again, this is the image that we've allowed our continent to build upon. That it's a continent where it's about conflict. It's about winning. It's about ethnic divides. It's about supporting your own ethnicity. It's about supporting your own community. It's about supporting your own religion. And that is because we're thinking in terms of winning and losing. We're not thinking as a collaborative group who will have our differences. But actually inherent in diversity and difference is progress. Because if I make it a business to understand what makes me different from you, if I make it my business to understand why you process information different from the way I process it, it actually enriches my life. It enriches my thought process. And it allows me to be more tolerant of why you are different or why you disagree. And that should be the cornerstone of making any decision, which is to understand that it is not going to be the perfect decision. It is more likely going to be a compromise, but that compromise needs to be robust. To be robust, it needs to encompass as many views as possible, as many thoughts as possible. Now, if you yourself, you're not able to incorporate that level of difference, that level of tolerance, that level of diversity, then you're going to make a very narrow decision. And those narrow decisions are what brings us some of the challenges we face in ethnicity, in ongoing conflict, in division, and so on. So if we're now going to build leadership of tomorrow, we have got to get them to a place where they can espouse the values of tolerance, the values of recognizing diversity, the values of recognizing difference, and being able to work with it on a permanent basis. Because what it does, it generates change as a constant. And you've got to be able to bring yourself to a point where you accept that that is going to be a constant in our lives. We're always going to be different, we're always going to process, but we need to do that as civilized men and women, determined to move forward. So for example, if we want to start a project in the Gambia, one of the things that frustrates me the most is many people's default is to consider what the development partners want to do. What are the development partners going to think? And that is a mindset we need to remove. It's a mindset we need to move away from. Where we want to be is our business. It's something we need to think about. I mean, the only thing Kagame has done is to work on that mindset for Rwandans, to feel enough pride to want to say, if you want to come to Rwanda, we have our idea of development. You come and work on that. If you can, good luck to you. And you know, look at the amount of innovative instruments that are coming out of Rwanda today. It is only because there is a shift in mindset. It's a mindset of feeling proud about who you are, feeling confident about who you are. So I always say to my kids, any room you put me into to debate an idea, I make sure I prepare myself so that I am confident I am not coming in as an underdog. I may learn from you. I may get some ideas from you that I use, but I do not come deferring to you. And we have got to build an African core, an African leadership that thinks like that, behaves like that, lives like that. And on that note, I end. Thank you very much.
Wow, 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 wow.
Well,
Fatou,
thank
you
you.
gonna say something or?
No, I
Do
was
we,
just
do
going
we?
to say thank you. I was just going to thank Mr. Ousainou Ngum. That was very interesting. The topic, of course, was decision making and make. Yes, yes, you can go ahead. Hello, hello, can you all hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, yeah. So I was saying that was very interesting, making decisions and taking responsibility for our decisions. That's important. And you did also mention that how important it is for people to take decisions, because if you do not make your own decisions, somebody else will make this for you. And that's very important for everybody to note. Just one more time, I just would like to tell our viewers that Mr. Ousainou Ngum is a Gambian international development and finance expert. TAF read his resume to all of you. That Mr. Ngum is also a chartered accountant with an MBA on change management. We're going to be taking questions later, but before we get to that, I would let TAF come in, and later we can go to the questions.
Oh, thank you very much, Fatou. Obviously, anybody who's been listening will agree that it was a very great lecture, and in detail. There's a lot to learn, and I don't know whether I can come up with the questions that are coming from the fellows. Alpha, I'm not sure whether I should do that now or do you want me to do that later? Maybe I can fire some few questions. I mean, do we do one question at a time? Because there's quite a number of questions that have been asked by the fellows. So let's just take the first one that I had. Somebody said, how can someone substantiate that the decision he or she takes is the best for an organization? How?
Okay. Now, the easiest answer to that is you measure it in terms of the impact on the organization on its bottom line. That's what organizations do. However, as I was saying, if it's a value-based decision, there are other criteria to use. And I'll give you a good example of why I say so. Today, organizations are being measured in terms of their sensitivity to gender equity, their sensitivity to disability, and so on and so forth. So it's a series of criteria. So the success of that decision, to measure it, it would have to depend on what criteria were you looking to achieve when you were making that decision beyond your bottom line.
Okay, great. Fatou, do you want to come with a question from the audience?
Right now, I do not have any questions yet. I have,
okay,
very nice comments from people appreciating the lectures and, how Gambia, we all know each other. Now they're like, oh, don't make Kila, that kind of thing.
But I have, Fatou, actually, I
interesting.
was also taking, there's some from, let me just take this one from Facebook. And somebody says that, what is the difference between the leader and manager in terms of decision-making decisions? A leader and a manager.
Well, a leader is looking to build more leaders. A leader is looking to be transformational. So in other words, a leader is someone who takes a long-term view, who is process-oriented. A manager just manages processes that are immediate, that are within his vicinity to achieve a key result, a tangible result. But leaders are transformational. They look to build for the future. They look for generational change so that they're able to pass the baton and the success continues and builds. That's what leaders do. Managers, however, manage processes that are finite, that are immediate.
Now, another one says, what is the importance of data in decision making?
Well, in fact, I was going to come that in my closing remarks. Data is the key to everything. I'm sure most of you hear the notion artificial intelligence. Today, the world is moving towards artificial intelligence in a significant way. And the backbone to artificial intelligence is data, data, data. Unfortunately, in our part of the world, when you go to the statistics departments, they're usually the least resourced, the least equipped. But actually, they need to be the best resource because data is key. If you have data, making decisions become significantly easier.
Excellent. This one is it's like a compliment. Somebody's asking you that if you can create your own networking channel, like all successful sharp minds.
Well, I mean, I already participate in the Africa Connect platform where I give weekly lectures. But the reason I was inviting Fatou to think about uniting the entire media fraternity is exactly that. I mean, there are a lot of people I admire on Gambian social media. People have brilliant ideas. The problem is it's dispersed. It's all over the place. And nobody is trying to bring all of that together, to pull it together for the benefit of all Gambians. But I think there are sharp minds in this country. This country is blessed with excellent minds. What we now need to do is to make it valuable to us so that, you know, the next generation benefits from that, and we keep passing it generation to generation. I mean, the Gambia belongs to us. We need to make sure we work together and bring the transformation we seek.
Yeah, that's important. I definitely will think about that. I'll talk to some of the owners of these media houses and see if we'll be able to come up with something. You know, I suggested this to my editor before to kind of have a forum that we will call the Editors Forum, where we will have editors from all the other newspapers to come forward, like on a Sunday, and talk about issues. So I will follow up with him again to see how far this is going. But I have a question that is sent to me now, and it says, can you ask him, please, regarding the exercise we did on how quick one makes decision? Am I right in saying that it's dependent on the situation? If it's a habit, then it wouldn't be quick and automatic. If it's an unknown territory, then the decision-making process would be longer.
Yes and no. Sometimes it can be a habit, but you will take time to make that decision. These are really dispensations that we have. You know, when you grow from being a child, like I gave the example, when you are a child, I remember my dad came to visit me one day, and he noticed that every time my son was crawling then, moved towards the table, I get up and go and try to stop him. So he said to me, you know, why don't you make your life easy? Take everything that's going to hurt this child and just let him spend his energy or her energy. And when I started doing that, I realized that after every 10 minutes, the poor kid falls asleep. You know, he's done so much that he just falls asleep, sleeps for about half an hour, gets up again, does the same thing again. So, and that's a habit. So he develops a habit of not being limited. You know, he's free to do anything he wants. Now he grows with that mindset that actually nobody is going to stop me. Now, if I constantly stopped him, he's going to grow with this mindset that I need to look at what my parent thinks before I do it. Now, going back to the question, that's where I say you can grow in that mindset, but move out. Like I grew in the mindset of being very instruction recipient. So I received instructions and I did it. But then I was fortunate to work in an environment where I was not given a choice. Nobody gave me instructions. I was thrown a problem and I needed to. So I needed to unlearn some of the habits that I had learned to be able to cope with my new environment. And that's the power of the human mind. If you push yourself, then but there's something inherent in us. We will always be a 1 to 5 or a 6 to 10. It's just inherent in us. We will make that decision very quickly, or we will make it very, very, very slowly. And the 6 to 10ers tend to frustrate people, unfortunately.
There's one thing that Tukulor is saying here, which I also do a lot of the times, that is analyzing everything first before I make a decision. Yep. I think about everything. Okay, what's gonna happen? Maybe the papers would write this, maybe they would say this, and make a decision based on that. Is that right?
That's a good thing, and you are a good person to have in a group because you are a maximizer. What you are trying to do is not to miss any opportunity. You're trying to explore everything as possible. Now, you're not going to get it all, but what you're doing is you're forcing people to consider all their options before they make a decision. So that's a good thing. That's actually a brilliant trait. Okay, great.
Can I also share this compliment? I think it's very important. Somebody that I have very high regards for. It's from Coach Pasambajao. You know, yes. He says, I first heard from this man at a TAF conference in the Gambia and was first blown away. I walked out of the conference feeling inspired and hopeful for my country. And let me just add that this is the reason that why I have my hashtag Gambia Fadem Diaquia. And let me also link it, as an announcement that if anybody knows any Gambian that is undiscovered, like our friend Mr. Ousainou Ngum, please, please, please send them through. I mean, make recommendations. That's what we're doing in this platform. We are looking for Gambians that are undiscovered. We all agree that there are so many talented Gambians, but we need to expose them. So please, those who are watching, if you know any Gambian, wherever he is and he's talented and you feel that we can learn from him, especially for these young ones. Remember, there's about 350 fellows who are connected in this. So I just thought I'll put this in. There are other compliments,
But TAF, I have a question for you. I mean, how do you find people like Mr. Ngum? Because you brought Sonko the other time. I'm like, I've never even heard about him. And then here is Ngum, who is also excellent. How do you find them?
Well, okay, both of them, I had a relationship with them. We all grew up, but there are quite a number of Gambians who are undiscovered, and we all have this responsibility. That's why we're throwing it out here now. It doesn't have to come from me. So we're asking for people to recommend Gambians. I mean, send their CVs. Actually, we have discovered new ones that I didn't know them before, and they will come in as a surprise. And you'll be blown out, when they speak. As coach says, we should be hopeful. As you know, me, I'm an optimist. And that's why my hashtag, I keep repeating it, Gambia Fadem Diaquia. So let's keep just sending the names, and I'm sure we will all celebrate our country. So Fatu, do you want to bring in some more questions or some comments?
Yes, we have some questions here, but I just wanted to add with everything that you were saying that I think LinkedIn is a good place to find them. So I'll be on LinkedIn now, checking them out. But yeah, there is a question right here that says, let me see, what's the best approach to convince management of an organization on the importance of leveraging on ICT, especially when they are change resistant, do not trust technology, and are used to the old-fashioned ways of doing things?
Well, that's a very interesting thing. Fatu, where I worked before, we did not have an IT department. What I did was I met up in Kenya with some university students, and I gave them $10,000. $10,000 was a lot of money for them. And I said, you know what? I want you to create me an intranet system that is interactive and modern for the organization. And their relationship continues with my organization today. They're called Juices. In fact, they were the first outfit that invented a respirator in Kenya during the COVID-19. But it was because I realized the value of ICT, but I also recognize that the power of ICT is in the youth. If you look at the people who have delivered transformational change, they're usually between the ages of 25 to 30. And I know we relegate that a lot in our societies because we focus on experience. But the most innovative minds tend to be between the ages of 25 and 35. And that's where the future of ICT belongs. When you look at the Zuckerbergs and all these other guys, they were at their most creative when they were age 25 going up. So we need to recognize that. So we need to have a system that gives, Pafatu, I will share this. I didn't want to, but I will. One of my preoccupations now is to actually, is to lobby for pension provision in this country to be liberalized. And let me tell you why I want that. Because I want enough capital available for people to invest in places where we can move this country forward. Because if you look at the state-owned enterprises, for example, at any moment in time, they're all holding in banks well over $9–10 billion, sitting in banks doing nothing. Sometimes it doesn't even earn interest, it sits in a current account. All our pension funds sit in treasury bills. Now, in my mind, we're stifling innovation. We're stifling creativity because young ones have enormous difficulty getting money from banks. So if we have a well-regulated environment, a well-regimented environment where we invest in newness, where we invest in ideas, where we invest in creativity, we're going to motivate our young. And in fact, some of them may not even choose the back way Because innovation doesn't just mean sitting in a classroom and writing, but it means recognizing that the world is moving forward. Technology is helping us to push the bar. So let us have the minds who can give us that technology, and we use that to transform the rest of society. So yes, it's an area where I think growth will come from. It's an area where I can see change. But we need to foster that change. We need to create that enabling environment and give them the investment they need. It's not a short-term game. It's a long-term game. And the reason why pension funds are useful is that you start working at age 25, your pension kicks in 30 years later. So that's a long time to build an investment. So that investment can be long-term. As long as it's well-regulated, it's well-regimented. And it also discourages the idea of any government, for that matter, thinking there's a coffer to which they can go that has resources. But that resource can be more valuable to the nation in a different way. Now, of course, it has to be well-regimented, it has to be well-regulated, but it needs thinking minds to do that. And we need to do that. We need to take our own responsibility and stop depending on donor assistance. I mean, the one that frustrates me most is technical assistance. Because there are moments when I've seen people come on technical assistance who you know their trajectory, you know they're not going to add value. But we need to bring our own value to the table. And ICT and creativity in general, new technologies beyond ICT will give us that. I mean, I'm a passionate believer in that.
Okay.
Excellent, excellent. Fatou, do you have any questions, or do we ask him to wrap up before we do? Because
yeah, I think because we're over, we're going into 2 hours soon, and I think we do have a lot of questions, but we would not, may not take all of them. And the good thing is everybody's talking about his mom, his dad, and that's so beautiful. So you made your parents proud. They were so bad, and everybody gets to know.
That's right.
I'm looking at the comments, and there's a lot of positive comments about that. So yes, I will hand over to you if you can wrap up, unless if you want us to go 2 hours.
Well, I think what we do is, Ousainou, probably you've taken some bit of water. We'll give you 5 minutes to wrap up. But also, please, whilst wrapping up, can you say something about the current situation in the country vis-a-vis the situation with COVID-19? Because as you know, there's a surge, and also there is some kind of a denial and also stigmatization. It is real, and we have seen the cases are going up. Can you match this whilst you're wrapping up? Just say something, so the huge audience that's listening will take this seriously, which also, I mean, I'll ask Fatou and myself to say something about it, because I think there's the need for us now to really advocate to avoid stigmatization and also a denial.
Yeah, I mean, it's a neat coincidence, TAF, in that my wrap-up was going to be around health in general. Now, what I really want to say about it is that health is a sector where when life is normal, when everything is normal, nobody wants to invest in health. Even governments struggle to be able to convince exchequers to put money in health, because the human dispensation is to always think about what return do I get when I invest. So you invest to get a return, but health is the one sector where actually you do not get a financial return, but actually you get a return that's a determinant for your finances, for everything else that goes on. Because if you don't have a healthy population, you can't do anything else. And this pandemic is a classic example of what that means when you don't have a healthy population, or you don't have the infrastructure to deliver health. The infrastructure to give people confidence that health can be delivered. So we need to start reflecting about how do we help states to make the right investments in social protection. Social protection in general, the provision of health, the provision of infrastructure, the provision of quality education, the provision of quality lives for citizens. I mean, when you go out now after it rains, it becomes a nightmare. So we need to make it our responsibility to deliver the core basics of social protection as a nation. All of us need to make that our business. Now, pushing forward, we need to focus on education and communication. Now, COVID-19 is nothing to stigmatize anybody or anything about. We have seen You know, the Crown Prince of England fell victim to COVID-19. The Prime Minister of England fell victim to COVID-19. So COVID-19 has no boundaries. It's non-discriminatory, it impacts, it inflicts everyone. But beyond that, what it says is that we all need to think about healthcare as a collective responsibility. Today, if any one of us gets infected, we go to the same place because we cannot fly out and go anywhere else. So that needs to educate our minds that actually this is what the drawdown lesson ought to be, that it is our responsibility to give ourselves, our citizens, the best we can find anytime. What we wish to have, we need to ensure every citizen has access to. If I want access to the best education, I need to ensure every citizen has access to that education system. And that is the only time we will begin to build a society based on equity and justice. In that, the provision is the same wherever you go. Now, stigma and discrimination is quite a significant issue. And it's an issue that we need to grapple with through communication and through interactions. And you can start that from the house you live in to demonstrate that there is nothing wrong having a positive test for COVID-19. In fact, it's a positive if you have a positive result and share it and share your experience and explain to people what you went through. Now, if we start doing that, we will flip the coin because people will then connect with the value of understanding what happens when you are infected, what to do to avoid being infected, rather than focusing on the negatives of someone who's infected. And that's a responsibility we all have. And we need to do that on a daily basis in our daily lives.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Fatou, do you want to say something before I wrap up?
Well, yeah, I just want to say that, you know, like he said, everyone can be infected with COVID and you may not even know where it is from, because I've seen that in Gambia now. There's a lot of stigmatization when it comes to COVID. What we got to do is that everybody stay home, and once somebody died, I know in Gambia they get to find out later. By that time, everybody is at their house at the funeral and all of that. People need to watch all of that and stay home and see how they can send messages and use or FaceTime if you miss friends and stuff like that, and be safe. Because by the look of things right now, it looks like we're having a lot of cases by the day. So this means that there's a lot of COVID in the Gambia. People who run offices, media houses, if you happen to have a case, please make sure that your office is locked down. Just make sure that you also disinfect, because if you don't, you're exposing more people to COVID, and that is not good at all.
Well, thank you very much, Fatou. I mean, I'll just add to that, that recently we have seen definitely a surge in cases, but I think also there is denial and also stigmatization. In general, as Gambians, we stigmatize any ailment. It is not your fault that you have fallen sick. It is not your fault that you are infected, but it is something that has happened. And the way to protect both yourself and your close family members is to make sure you follow the WHO guidelines. I mean, there are WHO guidelines. I mean, there's the Gambia Government Ministry of Health guidelines. There's a number to call. If you notice or find any symptom, please self-isolate. COVID-19 is not a death sentence. That's something that we have to realize. But in general, we do that. We stigmatize, you know, some of this ailment, which is not your fault. So please, I would appeal that those of you who are watching from outside, talk to your family members who are here in the Gambia, that if they find any symptom, if they feel otherwise, please let them expose it by calling the numbers that are available and not to hide it. Sibiru Pasena. Yes, 1025. Let's not hide it. That's the only way we can fight this. So on that note, I would like to thank, do you want to say something?
Well, just 1 minute before you go, because I read somewhere that people were asking if you have tested positive to COVID.
No, actually, yeah, yesterday what happened was, I mean, it's a long story. Gambia Talent Promotion, I think, posted something that I tested positive. So therefore, I gave him a very long interview, a very, very long, 3 hours interview, and I will refer you to that interview. There were a lot of things that were answered, but I was on self-isolation. because we learned about 5-6 days ago that Mr. Hassan Jallo, the late Hassan Jallo, the MD of GAIPA, the CEO of GAIPA, was in a meeting with us. And because he died of COVID, they asked all of us to self-isolate. Now, the self-isolation ended yesterday, which was 14 days. And that was why I posted my video on the beach exercising to show people that, you know, I am strong and fit and I haven't felt, you know, anything. I haven't seen the signs, thank God. And I want to thank also, just saying that there's quite a number of people who reached out, you know, who were concerned when they saw it. So I want to thank them for their prayers and everything, that I never tested positive and I am good. More so, you know, I am hypertensive, you know, for the past 23 years. So during this period, I made sure that I tested my blood pressure all the time because I have blood pressure machines and my blood pressure is under control. So I am comfortable and I'm happy with it. So on that note, Fatu, Alhamdulillah, we thank God, we thank God. But it's not an issue because, you know, people who know me will know that I am an advocate for health. And I always tell people that when I suffered from prostate cancer, which is much more serious than COVID-19, I came out and I said it in public about 12 years ago that I had prostate cancer, and I went through the treatment, and you can see 12 years now, I am still fit and running. So I am an advocate for people not to stigmatize any ailment. So do we close now by thanking our lecturer, Mr. Ousainou Ngum. He's done a brilliant lecture. He's given a very brilliant lecture. This is what we look for in trying to move this country forward. We need to create leaders. And the fellows who are connected here, as I said, this is the second cohort that we have. Last year we had about 50, this time about 350 registered. Today, about 150 are connected, and they are given assignments after every lecture. And the assignment is to do a one-page takeaway from the lecture that they have heard. So they will submit their takeaway before the next lecture comes in, which is in next 2 weeks, the 15th of August. So Alhaji Ousainou, I would like to thank you. We will be taking questions or suggestions on this program, and I would suggest that if anybody wants to nominate any Gambian to be a lecturer, please send an email to fjeng@tafafricafoundation.org. Actually, I've shared it on your page, and we will share it. So if anybody thinks about any Gambian, please send an email to fjeng@tafafricafoundation.org, because she's the coordinator. Now, let me announce our next lecturer. Our next lecturer is Mrs. Olidibawada. Ms. Olidibawada, as you probably know, was working for the AFDB, that's the African Development Bank. And last year she gave a lecture on empathy. So this year, she will also repeat the same lecture. She'll be on in the next 2 weeks to give a lecture on empathy. So ladies and gentlemen, fellows, all those who are connected, we want to thank you for the time that you have taken to connect and listen to this very valuable lecture on decision making. And I hope that you have learned a lot from it, from the lecture. And in doing so, please share what you have learned, because it's about nation building. We're trying to improve this country, a country that we all love, we all belong. And as a reminder, Fatu, don't forget about the Gambia Day by the media. It's a suggestion. Please find ways of contacting your colleagues, and maybe it's a beginning of having, you know, an excellent dialogue towards building the nation that we all love. So on that note, thank you very much again. And Fatu, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Ngum. Thank you, TAF. Thank you to the fellows as well. Really, it was a very good session, and we are looking forward to next week when we will have one, inshallah.
Thank you, Fatu. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, then. Thank you, everybody.
TAF Africa Global brings you exquisite yet affordable state of room and personal cash power meters. If you are looking for a spacious and suitable business environment, then the commercial rental spaces are made for you. This is exactly what you're looking for. Commercial spaces are limited, so rush now and rent a space with us today. For more information, contact 733-3363, 733-3363, or email at info@tafafricaglobal.com. Or better still, visit our website at www.tafafricaglobal.com. TAF Africa Global brings you exquisite yet affordable.
Imagine owning a home or a service plan. Enjoy the sunrise with a beautiful view. Morning hawks with your loved ones. And every instant. The never-ending story. Beautiful memories that will last for a lifetime. Sharing the best moment with family and friends. All you need is a TAFLA. Imagine owning a home or a service plan. Enjoy the sunrise with a beautiful view. Morning hawks with your loved ones. And everlasting. The never-ending story. Beautiful memories that will last for a lifetime. Sharing the best moment with family and friends. All you need is a TAFLA. Imagine owning a home or a service plan. Enjoy.
TAF Africa Global wale office da sona yadim ba sotali ila madiba molo kono mimbe TAF Burfoot Garden silabaka. Nin commercial office holding in 24-hour security system la nata, standby generator, air condition, conference room mi yalan ko nila staff so sala mitino sotoje ani fanson cash power. Ni atreba office nyinin kam mi yalan ka wara. Ni atreba office nyinin kam mi yalan ko pour mole ne taraje tabata. Ni atreba office nyinin kam mi yalan ka nila do ko be nyomoyla wotela nyini robe dafa katun TAF Africa Global yenyu commercial office le sotale la TAF madiba mall bumba kono mimbe Burfoot Garden silabaka. Na telephone bundal kumane ba memo 733